The silence was the first thing that drew Alex in. Not just quiet, but a profound, echoing stillness that seemed inherent to the very structure of Chloe's high-rise apartment. Perched 30 floors above the city sprawl, its stark white walls, polished concrete floors, and vast, undressed windows offered a minimalist sanctuary, a perfect antidote to the visual noise Alex navigated daily as a photographer. House-sitting for Chloe's extended trip abroad felt less like a favor and more like an artistic residency. Here, surrounded by curated emptiness, Alex hoped to capture the subtle interplay of light and shadow on blank surfaces, finding inspiration in the void. But the void, she would soon learn, wasn't entirely empty. Let's begin the story. Get comfortable and listen closely. Alex ran a hand along the cool, smooth concrete floor, a sigh of contentment escaping her lips. This was it. Perfection. Or as close to it as habitable space could get. Chloe, bless her nomadic heart and impeccable taste, had furnished the apartment with monastic restraint, a low platform bed in one corner, a sleek metal desk and chair near the panoramic window, and nothing else besides the built-in kitchen appliances and bathroom fixtures. Even Alex's own contributions, her camera bag, tripod, a few changes of clothes in a duffel, and a case of art supplies, felt like intrusions, temporary clutter soon to be organized or utilized. She spent the first day acclimatizing, letting the vastness of the space seep into her. She moved slowly, deliberately, her footsteps echoing slightly in the main living area. The city skyline, a jagged tapestry of glass and steel, unfurled beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows, a distant, muted reality. Inside, however, was her controlled environment. She texted Chloe a simple confirmation, "Arrived. Place is amazing. Surreal." Chloe's reply buzzed in hours later, "Time zones away, glad you like it. Wi-Fi password on the fridge. Water the sad little succulent twice a week. Otherwise, enjoy the peace. Don't throw any wild parties, smile talk soon." Alex smiled. Parties were the furthest thing from her mind. She spent the afternoon setting up her camera, taking long exposure shots of the shifting afternoon light painting stripes across the floor, capturing the abstract beauty of the empty rooms. She meticulously cleaned the already spotless surfaces, erasing her own faint traces, wanting the purest possible starting point for her observations. The polished concrete gleamed under the recessed lighting as dusk settled, reflecting the city lights like scattered jewels. She checked the triple-pane windows, sealed tight against the wind and noise. The heavy front door, with its complex digital lock, clicked shut with satisfying finality. Secure. Silent. Empty. She slept deeply that first night, cocooned in the quiet. Morning arrived not with an alarm, but with the gentle insistence of pale sunlight filtering through the vast windows. Stretching, Alex padded barefoot towards the kitchen alcove, her eyes tracing the clean lines of the room. Then she stopped. Near the base of the main window, caught in the angled morning light, were faint impressions on the floor. They were barely visible, like residual patterns left by dampness that had long since evaporated, or perhaps fine dust settling in an unusual way. But the shape. It was distinctly like the outline of bare feet. 2 of them, side by side, facing into the room. They were small, significantly smaller than her own size 8s, perhaps the size of a child's or a very small adult's. Her brow furrowed. Cleaners? Chloe hadn't mentioned anyone coming in. Residual dust from the HVAC vents? Possible, she supposed. Concrete could hold on to faint marks. Still, it pricked at her sense of order, a tiny flaw in the otherwise perfect canvas. She retrieved her cleaning supplies and methodically wiped the area, scrubbing until the floor was a uniform, unblemished gray. Satisfied, she continued with her morning routine, dismissing it as an odd quirk of the building. Later that day, a sliver of unease prompted her to double-check everything. The digital lock on the front door showed no unauthorized access attempts. The windows were locked from the inside, showing no signs of tampering. She even peered into the HVAC vents, seeing nothing but clean metal ductwork. She texted Chloe again, "Hey, quick question, did you have cleaners in right before you left? Or does anyone else have access codes?" Chloe's reply came quickly this time, "Nope, just you. Cleaned it myself before heading out. Changed the code too." "Why, what's up?" "Nothing really," Alex texted back, suddenly feeling foolish. "Just noticed a weird dust pattern on the floor this morning. Probably nothing. Place is immaculate otherwise." She put the phone down, trying to shake off the faint, lingering sense of disquiet. It was just dust. It had to be. This perfect, empty space wouldn't tolerate imperfections for long. She spent the rest of the day absorbed in her photography, capturing the stark geometry of the apartment, forcing the anomaly from her mind. That night, before sleeping, she meticulously cleaned the floor near the window one last time, ensuring it was absolutely pristine. The pale light of dawn crept into the room again, pulling Alex from a restless sleep. She lay still for a moment, listening to the profound silence, broken only by the faint, distant hum of the city awakening far below. Then, she sat up, swinging her legs over the side of the low bed, her bare feet meeting the cool concrete. She looked towards the window. Her breath hitched. They were back. In the exact same spot as yesterday morning, near the base of the massive window, were the faint outlines of two small, bare feet. But this time, they seemed clearer, more defined. Still subtle, requiring the specific angle of the morning light to be truly visible, but undeniably there. And just like before, they pointed inwards, towards the center of the vast, empty living area. Then, nothing. No trail leading away, no return path, no other marks disturbing the immaculate surface she had so carefully cleaned mere hours before. A chill, unrelated to the morning air, traced its way down her spine. This wasn't residual dust. This wasn't a trick of the light. This was something reappearing despite her efforts. Her artistic instincts warred with a rising sense of dread. Part of her wanted to erase the intrusion immediately, restore the perfect emptiness. But the photographer, the observer in her, took over. She grabbed her camera, mounted it on the tripod, and began documenting the footprints meticulously. Macro shots, wide shots, shots from different angles, capturing how the light interacted with the faint impressions. They didn't look dirty, not like actual dusty footprints. They seemed like subtle compressions, or areas where the very texture of the polished concrete was momentarily altered, catching the light differently. Rational explanations circled her mind like vultures, growing weaker with each pass. A prank? Impossible. Chloe was overseas, and no one else had access. Some bizarre atmospheric phenomenon related to the building's pressure or temperature differentials causing condensation patterns? It seemed wildly improbable, especially in such a specific, recurring shape. No. She needed to control the variables. Her meticulous nature, usually reserved for composition and light, now turned forensic. After photographing the prints from every conceivable angle, she cleaned the area again, scrubbing with focused intensity. Then, she went to her art supplies. She found a small canister of fine, white talcum powder. Returning to the window area, she carefully dusted a thin, even layer across the section of floor where the prints had appeared, extending a few feet around it. Any physical intrusion, no matter how slight, would disturb the powder. Next, she took strong packing tape and meticulously sealed the edges of the large window from the inside, running strips along every seam where the glass met the frame. If it was some minuscule draft carrying particles, this should stop it. Finally, she consciously decided to avoid that entire section of the room. She would confine her movements to the other side of the living area, the kitchen, and the bedroom. She spent the day working at her desk, editing photos, deliberately keeping her back to the window area. But her focus was fractured. Every slight creak of the building, every distant siren, seemed amplified. The stark emptiness, once a source of calm inspiration, now felt vast and watchful. The silence seemed to hold its breath. She found herself glancing towards the powdered area, searching for any disturbance, her heart thrumming with a nervous energy she couldn't quell. Sleep came fitfully that night. She dreamed of empty rooms stretching infinitely, filled with faint, whispering echoes. She woke before dawn, a knot of anxiety tight in her stomach. She forced herself to wait until the first proper light filled the room before getting up. Slowly, heart pounding, she approached the window area. The tape along the window seals was perfectly intact, undisturbed. She knelt beside the powdered section of the floor. Her breath caught again, sharp and painful. The talcum powder was pristine. Smooth, white, and completely unmarked by any scuff, drag, or disturbance. Except for the footprints. There they were, imprinted on top of the fine layer of powder. Two small, bare footprints, clearer than ever, pressed into the white dust as if materialized from above. They hadn't disturbed the surrounding powder, they simply existed within it. Faint, yet undeniable. The rational explanations didn't just dwindle, they evaporated completely, leaving behind a cold, terrifying vacuum. Intense, primal unease washed over Alex. Something was happening in this empty apartment, something that defied logic, something that left its mark without any apparent physical means. And it was happening while she was sealed inside, alone. The discovery in the powder marked a turning point. The faint unease solidified into a persistent, gnawing anxiety. The footprints near the window became an almost expected, albeit deeply unsettling, morning ritual. Alex continued to photograph them, her digital archive growing into a disturbing catalog of the impossible. But then, the phenomenon began to spread. One morning, she found a similar faint footprint outline in the middle of the short hallway connecting the living area to the bedroom and bathroom. Another day, a pair appeared in the center of the spare, completely unfurnished second bedroom, a room she'd barely even opened the door to. These new prints shared the same characteristics: small, bare, appearing overnight on surfaces she knew were clean and undisturbed, and vanishing gradually throughout the day. Then came the handprints. Equally faint, equally inexplicable. One appeared low on the star-quiet wall near the hallway prints, like a small hand-pressed flat. Another materialized on the inside of the large living room window, several feet away from the recurring footprints, fingers slightly splayed. Like the footprints, they weren't smudges of dirt or oil, they were subtle impressions, visible only when the light hit them just right, disturbances on the very surface they occupied. They always appeared in areas Alex hadn't recently touched or occupied. The apartment, her supposed sanctuary of controlled emptiness, was developing a geography of unseen passage. Alex knew she couldn't keep this to herself any longer, rationalizations be damned. She compiled the best photos, the footprints near the window, the one in the hallway, the handprint on the glass, the clear impressions in the talcum powder, and emailed them to Chloe. She kept the tone factual, trying to sound calm, merely perplexed. "Hey Chloe, remember I mentioned those weird marks? Well, they keep appearing. And spreading. Took some photos. Have you ever noticed anything like this before? Any history with the apartment or building?" Chloe's reply, when it came, was a mixture of disbelief and concern. "Whoa, Alex, that is weird. Honestly? Never seen anything like that. Maybe it's extreme static electricity attracting dust in weird patterns? Or condensation? Are you sure the windows are sealed properly? Maybe get the building super to check the vents/seals just in case? Also, and don't hate me for asking, any chance you could be sleepwalking? Stress can do funny things." Alex bristled at the sleepwalking suggestion but knew Chloe meant well. "Definitely not sleepwalking," she replied curtly. "And these aren't dust smudges. Look at the powder pick. I'll call the super about the vents." "Good idea." Mr. Davis, the building superintendent, was exactly as Alex pictured him, mid-50s, gruff, with the weary air of someone who'd seen too many leaky faucets and noise complaints. He arrived promptly, belt slung low on his hips. Alex showed him the areas, though the prints from the previous night had mostly faded by the afternoon. She explained about the recurring nature, trying not to sound completely unhinged. He peered at the window seals, grunted. He checked the HVAC vents, shining a flashlight inside. "Everything looks standard," he declared, his voice echoing slightly in the sparse apartment. "Filters are clean, seals are tight. These new buildings, they're sealed up pretty good. High efficiency." He paused, scratching his chin. "Get strange complaints sometimes, though. People hear things, feel drafts that aren't there. Static buildup, maybe. Or just settling." He shrugged, clearly unconvinced there was a real problem he could fix. "If it keeps happening, let me know, but honestly, beats me." His dismissal, while expected, only deepened Alex's isolation. Static electricity didn't form perfect footprints on top of talcum powder. Settling didn't leave handprints on walls. Fine. If external validation wasn't coming, she needed definitive proof for herself. That evening, she set up her high-resolution camera on its tripod again, positioning it carefully to cover the primary footprint area near the window. This time, she enabled the motion detection feature and set it to record high-definition video throughout the night. If anything physical, no matter how small or fast, moved through that space, the camera would capture it. She checked the battery, cleared the memory card, and framed the shot: the pristine, clean floor, the sealed window, the empty space waiting. As darkness enveloped the city outside, casting long, distorted shadows across the polished floor, Alex retreated to the bedroom, the faint red light of the recording camera the only sentinel in the vast, silent living area. She felt a sliver of hope: technology would provide an answer. It had too. Alex woke before dawn, the anticipation a physical weight in her chest. She resisted the urge to immediately check the living room floor, focusing instead on the camera. Retrieving the memory card, she hurried back to her desk, slotting it into her laptop. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the video files. The recording began predictably, hours of absolute stillness. The empty floor gleamed under the ambient city light filtering through the window. Dust motes, invisible to the naked eye, drifted lazily in the camera's sensitive lens, occasionally triggering brief motion-detected recordings, but showing nothing more than air currents. Alex fast-forwarded, scanning through the uneventful hours after midnight. 1 a.m. 2 a.m. 3 a.m. Still nothing. The floor remained immaculate. Then, around 3:47 a.m., it happened. Not movement, but a sudden, jarring burst of digital chaos. For approximately 3 seconds, the image dissolved into a cascade of pixelation, flickering static, and distorted blocks of color, like a corrupted video file. The time code at the bottom of the screen jumped erratically during the glitch. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the image stabilized. The floor was still empty. But now, faint but clear in the stabilized post-glitch footage, the two small footprints were visible near the window. Alex replayed the segment again. And again. The glitch was violent, intrusive, a momentary rupture in the recording. Before the static burst, the floor was clean. Immediately after the static cleared, the footprints were there. The camera, designed to capture motion, had recorded nothing creating them. It had only recorded the moment of their apparent arrival, masked by digital interference. It wasn't proof of an intruder, it was proof of something stranger. Something that disrupted not just the floor, but the technology observing it. A cold dread, deeper than before, settled over Alex. This wasn't about leaky seals or static, it was about something that operated outside the normal rules of physics, something that could impress itself upon reality while remaining unseen, even leaving a digital scar in its wake. She abandoned the camera footage and went to examine the prints themselves, kneeling on the cold concrete. She looked closer than ever before, her photographer's eye searching for minute details. They weren't on the surface as much as they seemed impressed into it. Not deep, but a subtle alteration. Holding her phone flashlight at an acute angle, she could see the faintest difference in texture where the prints lay, a slight compression or smoothing of the polished concrete's microscopic grain. They didn't feel dusty or wet to the touch, they felt like the floor itself, only different. Changed. And she knew, from previous observations, they would gradually fade over the next 12 to 24 hours, the surface slowly returning to uniformity, only for new ones to appear the following night. It was less like something being left behind and more like a momentary bleed-through, an impression from elsewhere fading as the point of contact receded. Sleep became a luxury Alex could no longer afford easily. The nights were fraught with tension, every creak of the building sounding like a footstep, every flicker of the city lights outside seeming like movement glimpsed peripherally. The minimalist apartment, once a symbol of calming order, now felt terrifyingly exposed. Its vast, empty surfaces offered no hiding places, only endless stages for the phenomenon to manifest. The clean lines seemed sharp, menacing. The silence felt heavy, pregnant with unseen attention. She started leaving lights on in the living area and hallway, a futile gesture against something that didn't seem to perceive light or darkness. Rationally, she knew locks and barriers were pointless, nothing physical was getting in. Yet, instinctively, she began dragging the heavy desk chair to wedge under the bedroom doorknob before attempting sleep. It was an irrational act born of primal fear, a need to create some boundary, however meaningless, against the encroaching strangeness. Her meticulously maintained composure began to fray. The isolation, 30 floors up in a silent, watchful apartment, pressed in on her, magnifying her fear into a low, constant hum of anxiety. She felt under observation, not by eyes, but by the space itself. The empty air seemed to hold a latent energy, a witness to her growing terror. The phenomenon was evolving, or perhaps Alex was simply becoming more attuned to its subtler manifestations. The footprints and handprints continued their nightly appearances, sometimes shifting location slightly, but always within the undisturbed zones of the apartment. But now, there was more. One afternoon, deciding to finally unpack some of her lesser-used art supplies stored in the spare bedroom, she pulled back a dust sheet covering a lone armchair Chloe had left there. On the smooth, slightly dusty fabric of the sheet, there was a faint, unmistakable depression, the shallow outline of someone having sat there. It wasn't deep, just a subtle disturbance in the dust and fabric, but the shape was undeniable. And like the footprints, it hadn't been there when she'd last glanced in the room days ago. Alex felt a wave of nausea, the idea of this unseen presence not just passing through, but lingering, settling into the furniture, felt like a profound violation. Other sensory details began to intrude. Sometimes, Near the area where the prints were freshest in the morning, the air would hold a distinct, localized cold spot. Not a draft, but a pocket of intense chill that dissipated if she moved just a foot away. On one occasion, while photographing a new handprint on the wall, she thought she saw it, a brief, shimmering distortion in the air directly in front of the print, like heat haze on a cold day, lasting only a second before vanishing. Then came the sounds. Or, the impression of sounds. They were incredibly faint, operating at the threshold of hearing, easily dismissed as tinnitus or the building settling. But they seemed to coincide with the pre-dawn hours when the prints likely appeared. A soft, sighing sound, like displaced air. A barely there shuffling or whispering, a texture of noise so subtle it vanished the moment she tried to focus on it. She set up a sensitive audio recorder alongside her camera, hoping to capture something concrete. Reviewing the recordings later yielded mostly silence, but occasionally, coinciding with the time frame of the camera glitches, the software registered ambiguous low-frequency hums or brief bursts of white noise like static that hadn't been audible in the room. The lack of concrete answers fueled a desperate need for context. Who, or what, was the trace walker, as she'd begun to think of it? Was it tied to the apartment? The building? The land itself? Alex turned to her laptop, diving into online research. She searched for the history of the downtown area where the sleek, modern high-rise stood. Initial searches revealed the usual layers of urban development: warehouses, older commercial buildings, raised for the new tower. But digging deeper, through digitized archives of old city maps and historical society forums, she found a possible thread. The plot of land, before the industrial era, had bordered an old, unmarked potter's field, a burial ground for the indigent and unknown, paved over and forgotten in the relentless march of progress. Further searches led her to obscure architectural blogs and forums discussing sick building syndrome and spatial anomalies in modern construction. One thread debated the psychological effects of minimalist design in large structures. Another touched upon experimental, high-density concrete composites used in some new luxury towers, with unsubstantiated rumors of strange resonance properties or unexpected static field generation. There was no smoking gun, no definitive link saying ghosts haunt this specific building, but the fragmented pieces, the forgotten dead beneath, the potentially strange materials of the structure itself, the inherent emptiness of the space, began to form a disturbing mosaic in Alex's mind. Was the trace walker a displaced echo from the potter's field, its passage somehow facilitated or trapped by the building's modern geometry and materials? Or was it something inherent to the structure, a side effect of materials and design interacting in unforeseen ways, drawn to the stillness she cultivated? The ambiguity was almost worse than a defined threat. It meant the source was unknowable, perhaps intrinsic to the very place she was trapped in. A chilling new certainty began to crystallize in Alex's mind: the phenomenon was aware of her. The manifestation started feeling less random, more pointed. One morning, the faint footprints didn't stop in the center of the living room, they led directly to the edge of her low bed, stopping just inches from where she slept. Another day, the faint outline of a small handprint appeared not on a distant wall, but on the fogged surface of her bathroom mirror after a shower, perfectly positioned at eye level for someone much shorter. It felt like a test. A deliberate probing of her reactions. The initial sense of something merely passing through shifted to a feeling of being observed, studied, even taunted by an invisible, silent intelligence. The emptiness of the apartment no longer felt neutral, it felt like the conscious medium of this entity, the canvas it used to communicate its presence directly to her. In a moment of near desperation, bordering on frustrated anger, Alex tried some of the cliché ghost hunting techniques she'd seen in movies, feeling foolish even as she did them. She poured a line of salt across the doorway to the living room. The next morning, footprints appeared on both sides of it, undisturbed. She tried leaving out religious symbols she didn't even believe in, nothing changed. Then, she tried disrupting the environment itself. If the entity was drawn to undisturbed empty spaces, she would eliminate them. She started leaving her art supplies scattered across the floor near the window, placed stacks of books in the hallway, draped clothes over the spare armchair. She filled the stark silence with music playing constantly. The effect was negligible, perhaps even counterproductive. The footprints simply appeared on top of a scattered sketchbook page. The handprint manifested on the window pane between two carelessly hung shirts. The faint sounds seemed to weave themselves through the music. The trace walker wasn't deterred by clutter or noise, it simply incorporated them into its canvas, or shifted its point of impression slightly. It adapted. The feeling of being watched intensified, as if her attempts to deter it were noted with detached curiosity. Amidst this escalating psychological siege, a text message from Chloe arrived. jolting Alex back to external reality. Good news. Project wrapped early. Heading back sooner than expected. Should be home in about 3 days. Can't wait to see you and reclaim my Zen palace. Hope you haven't burned it down. Smile. 3 days. The message landed like a countdown timer. Panic flared in Alex's chest. How could she possibly explain any of this to Chloe? How could she hand back the keys to this beautiful, minimalist apartment knowing it was being nightly traversed by whatever this was? More pressingly, Chloe would see the state Alex was in, the exhaustion, the paranoia etched onto her face, the scattered attempts at warding off the unseen. She had to understand what was happening, maybe even find a way to stop it, before Chloe walked back into her home. The deadline transformed her fear into a desperate urgency. The next few nights weren't just about survival, they were about confrontation or discovery. Time was running out. The night before Chloe's expected return was electric with tension. Alex didn't even attempt sleep, choosing instead to sit awake at the desk, camera and audio recorder running, eyes scanning the dimly lit living area. The activity started earlier, felt more pronounced. Faint prints appeared near the window, then another set materialized near the hallway entrance only moments later. The cold spot near the window pulsed, intensifying, making her teeth ache. The faint sighing sound seemed louder, closer. A shimmering distortion flickered briefly near the ceiling corner. It felt like the space itself was thrumming with latent energy. Alex watched, exhausted but hyper-alert, her mind racing through the patterns, the locations, the nature of the impressions. It was always on surfaces, floors, walls, windows, furniture coverings. Always faint, like an echo. Always appearing without visible cause, often accompanied by technological glitches or sensory anomalies like cold or sound. It didn't interact with the objects, it impressed upon them. Then, she saw it. A new footprint was beginning to form on the polished concrete floor, about 10 feet in front of her. It wasn't instantaneous, it was like watching a photograph develop in slow motion, the faint outline gradually darkening, becoming more defined over several seconds. Her eyes darted upwards instinctively. Directly above the forming footprint, on the smooth white surface of the ceiling, she saw a corresponding, fleeting distortion, a subtle darkening, a momentary waver in the paint, mirroring the shape below before fading almost instantly. The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow. The trace walker wasn't in the room. It wasn't walking on the floor or touching the walls in her dimension. It was passing through the space, its path intersecting with her reality. The apartment, with its clean lines and stark surfaces, acted like sensitive film, capturing faint impressions where the entity's passage grazed the physical plane, the floors, the ceilings, the walls, the windows. It wasn't an intruder in the conventional sense, it was an interdimensional transit leaving residual traces on the boundaries of her world. Driven by a surge of adrenaline, a mix of terror, desperate curiosity, and the impending deadline of Chloe's arrival, Alex acted without thinking. The footprint on the floor was still solidifying, the cold spot nearby palpable. She grabbed the heavy metal flashlight from her desk, switched it to its brightest strobe setting, and aimed it directly at the forming impression, stepping closer. "What are you?" she whispered, the sound loud in the charged silence. "What do you want?" The reaction was immediate and deeply unsettling. It wasn't violent aggression, but a defensive recoil, like poking something sensitive. The forming footprint didn't complete, instead, it seemed to smear rapidly across the concrete, elongating and distorting before vanishing entirely in a blur. The localized cold spot flared intensely, painfully cold against her skin, making her gasp and stumble back. The audio recorder beside her laptop emitted a loud burst of harsh static, cutting out abruptly. The lights in the apartment flickered violently for a second, and the air pressure seemed to drop momentarily, making her ears pop. And in that instant of sensory chaos, as the flashlight beam strobed across the opposite wall, she saw it. For a fraction of a second, projected or impressed onto the white paint, was the terrifyingly clear silhouette of a full figure. It was humanoid in shape, roughly child-sized as the footprints suggested, but utterly featureless, smooth, indistinct, like a shadow cast from a dimension without detail. It existed for barely a heartbeat, a stark black cutout against the white wall, before dissolving back into nothingness as the lights stabilized. The reaction was over as quickly as it began. The cold spot vanished. The static stopped. The smeared print was gone. But the image of that featureless silhouette was burned into Alex's retinas, a final, terrifying confirmation of the presence she had been documenting. Silence descended. Absolute, profound silence, heavier and more unnerving than any before. The heightened activity ceased completely. The air settled, the faint hum of the building returning to its normal, unnoticed frequency. The residual fear from the confrontation lingered, but beneath it lay something deeper, a cold, existential dread. Alex hadn't banished the entity, she had provoked it. She had observed something it didn't want observed, forced a reaction that confirmed its otherness, its presence between the surfaces of her world. And it knew she had seen it. She couldn't stay. Not another night. Not even another hour. Chloe's impending arrival was no longer the primary concern, her own sanity, her own safety, was. Moving with robotic efficiency fueled by adrenaline and lack of sleep, Alex began to pack. She shoved her clothes, camera gear, and art supplies haphazardly into her bags, her movements jerky and hurried. She didn't care about order anymore, she just needed to leave. Before walking out, however, a strange compulsion took over. She retrieved the cleaning supplies. Methodically, obsessively, she began cleaning the apartment one last time. She scrubbed the floors, wiped the walls, polished the windows, erasing any trace of her own occupation, erasing the faint, lingering impressions from the night's events. It was a frantic attempt to restore the apartment to the blank canvas she had found, a desperate ritual to sever her connection to the place, to appease the violated emptiness. She left it as stark, as silent, as immaculate as it had been upon her arrival. On the sleek kitchen counter, she left Chloe's keys and a hastily typed note, printed and folded. It was rambling, probably incoherent, warning Chloe about inexplicable occurrences, about footprints and handprints, about the camera glitches and the feeling of being watched. She urged Chloe to be careful, to consider breaking the lease, unsure if her friend would believe a word or just assume Alex had suffered a breakdown under the pressure of isolation and artistic temperament. She didn't wait for the elevator. She took the fire stairs, descending 30 flights with her heavy bags, the rhythmic clang of her footsteps on the metal stairs a stark contrast to the oppressive silence she was fleeing. She didn't look back at the gleaming tower as she emerged onto the pre-dawn street, hailing the first available cab. Months passed. Alex moved into a smaller, older apartment, deliberately filling it with furniture, books, plants, comfortable clutter. She avoided large, empty rooms, polished floors, and panoramic windows. Minimalism, once her aesthetic ideal, now triggered a low hum of anxiety. She painted again, but her subjects were dense landscapes, intricate cityscapes, anything but blank spaces. She tried to process what happened, sometimes convincing herself it was stress, isolation, infrasound, anything rational. But the memory of the featureless silhouette, the feeling of the cold spot, the undeniable evidence on her camera, it lingered. One rainy afternoon, she was in her makeshift darkroom, a converted closet, developing black and white film from a recent trip to a remote, windswept coastline. She'd been trying to capture the stark beauty of an empty beach, the interplay of sand, sea, and overcast sky. An image began to emerge in the developing tray, the wide expanse of damp sand, marked only by the receding tide lines. She leaned closer, examining the details under the dim red safe light. Her heart seized. There, near the edge of the frame, on a patch of otherwise smooth, untouched sand, was a single, faint impression. Almost invisible, easily missed, caught only by the angle of the light and the sensitivity of the film. It was the unmistakable outline of a small, bare footprint. The tracewalker wasn't just in the apartment. It wasn't just tied to the building or the land. It was drawn to stillness, to observation, to empty spaces. And perhaps, now, it was drawn to her. Anywhere there was a blank canvas, it could leave its mark. Enjoyed the story? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.